For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh. Today we are getting down and dirty with In a Violent Nature. In a Violent Nature is written and directed by Chris Nash, and it tells the story of a spirit of a serial killer that gets awoken, and a small town pays the price for said awakening. This film, I feel like, is going to be really divisive among horror fans, and I'll tell you why. First off, if you are a horror fan, then you know about all of the legality troubles that Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees have been having for the past 15 years. This year now celebrates 15 years since Jason Voorhees has graced a legitimate studio film, aside from a number of fan films. This film honestly feels like it's bridging the gap from the last remake that we got in 2009 to kind of be this big studio fare to really satisfy fans of Jason Voorhees. I would say this movie also has like the elegance and the simplicity of John Carpenter's Halloween with a little touch of Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then there are certain aspects of it that feel very modern. Like it has this elevated quality to it that you find in a lot of some A24 and Jordan Peele type of horror films. And it also has a lot of really gross out gags that you would find in the Terrifier films. One would think that if you mix it all together, all of these elements, you would have a perfect film, a 5-star rating, clear across the board, and this is where I think it's going to divide fans, and this is certainly where it divided me. I had been looking forward to this film since all of the buzz coming out of Sundance for this movie back in January. I was eagerly awaiting this movie, and I gotta say, this it's fine. It's nothing groundbreaking for the genre. It definitely will satisfy fans that have been longing for a new Friday the 13th film, but overall, it's just fine. I'm going to keep talking and comparing this movie to the Friday the 13th movies because it feels very akin, everything from its mythology that I'll talk about in just a few minutes to even the origins of how our antagonist gets his mask and weapons feels very adjacent to the relationships between Fridays Part 2 and 3. And that's why I said if you're a fan of Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees, you're a diehard, this will absolutely make your heart sing. I am a casual Friday the 13th fan. It's an okay series. It's not my favorite. It's okay, and I have fun with them, but that's probably why I'm so middle of the road when it comes to this movie. And I will also say that the merging of the two eras of horror don't really balance themselves out correctly. Like, there are moments where the film feels very heavily handed when it comes to the 80s slasher homage. And then there are, on the other side, you have this kind of elevated approach to the storytelling and kind of like this simplicity, and the two just don't balance each other out very well. I would say a third of this movie is literally just shots of people walking. The last act of this movie is way too drawn out, and it leads to one of the saddest excuses for a conclusion that I've come across any film this year. And I think choices like that in terms of the storytelling definitely are giving the viewers style over substance. I don't come to a slasher film with the expectations of having substance. Now, it's a nice, pleasant surprise, but having the ability to spend time with the victims that will soon be knocked off not only creates for a fun and funny atmosphere, but also gives the film character. And the fact that we spend a third of this movie simply following a killer just makes this movie feel really lifeless. That said, there are a few qualities about this movie that I genuinely really did like. I know we're only a couple months away from Terrifier 3, but this movie sets the bar already for probably one of the best gags of the year. And if you've seen the movie, then you know the scene I'm talking about. It's the infamous somebody fainted and threw up at it kind of scene. And it's a really creative gag, and it's really effective. And I think a lot of the gags outside of that one are also some of the most refreshing horror gags that I've come across in recent memory. I'm kind of glad that we're getting a slasher film that has creativity when it comes to its kills, and this one has a lot of creativity and also has some really fun moments that it creates. This movie is very fast paced. I mean, it's very, very fast paced. I really loved how smooth this film goes. Again, outside of the third act that, again, as I said, dragged on. I love the mythology here. I absolutely loved the mythology. I felt like a lot of the more supernatural elements that I've always had complaints about when it comes to the Friday the 13th franchise were answered here and allowed this film, even for some of its more supernatural elements, to feel grounded. And I really liked the approach and how they created this lore around our antagonist. But overall, I'm ready to run this one through the Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give In a Violent Nature a 3 out of 5. This movie's fine. It doesn't break any ground when it comes to creating something new for the slasher. I think it just had a little bit of artistic decisions that didn't really resonate with me, and I don't think it'll resonate with a lot of other people. The audience that I saw this with was very split. Some really liked this movie and praised it for its diversity in the slasher genre, and some were just thought it was just really too artsy for something like this. And that's kind of my takeaway. I feel like this movie is really incredibly unbalanced when it comes to either being a 80s slasher that has like, typically a level of camp, and then there's this, we're going to take it so seriously modern elevation approach to the genre, and the merging of those two worlds just don't really work here. But it does have its good gags, and it does have some interesting lore and mythology behind it. So I'd be kind of curious to see if they did do more sequels in this world. I'd be interested to see where the story would go. But these are my thoughts. If you guys have seen In a Violent Nature, what did you guys think? Comment below and let me know. And if you haven't seen it yet, you're watching reviews to kind of know, should I go waste my money on this movie? Comment below and let me know what your favorite Friday the 13th movie is. Mine is Jason Lives Part 6. It's an incredible standout in the franchise for me. This would be usually the part where I would talk about mental health, but honestly, this film's a little bit too quiet when it comes to the subject of mental health. And so I'm just going to put it right here that if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, click the links in the show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. The reason that Victims and Villains exists, we're a multimedia nonprofit that creates content like what you're watching right now to talk about mental health through pop culture. And even if there isn't innately something that we can pull out from this movie and talk about mental health, we can let you guys know that you are not alone if you are struggling with any of the things that I've talked about. And our mental health resource library in the show notes below does address these to a number of degrees for resources ranging from general to LGBT to bullying to addiction and more. In a Violent Nature is now playing in theaters everywhere, limited release from IFC Films and Shudder, and will be available to stream on Shudder later this year. Click the notes, click the subscribe button below to check out more content from us. And until next time, remember to keep it classy and keep it scary.